Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We've been off for about a week now, so we've got a lot to catch up on in regards to the last week. I was, as we talked about in the last episode, I was on my way to Charlotte the next day for UNC in Florida in Charlotte. And then Cody and I later in the week, we were supposed to be going to Duke at Georgia Tech on Saturday. Had to make a quick pivot because of weather in Boston. Flights got canceled, but it ended up with us seeing 3 different games over the course of the weekend, starting Friday night. As you can see, for those of you watching on video with Cody's hat, started at Providence, St. John's at Providence, which was a great game, great atmosphere. And then we continued on to New York City, Madison Square Garden, where we saw the CBS Sports Classic with the first game between UNC and UCLA, and then Ohio State and Kentucky to close that out before returning back to Maine, getting back Sunday morning around 3 a.m. So was a whirlwind of a trip with also a Celtics game squeezed in there as well. So, 4 basketball games in less than 48 hours in 3 different states. So it was a great trip, a lot of basketball. Definitely can't complain about that.
Yeah. Interesting weekend. That's for sure. Had to make a quick pivot after the flight got canceled. Maybe almost a blessing in disguise. We saw 3 really, really good basketball games and 2 games that came down to the wire, one at the buzzer, and UNC obviously came roaring back in the Garden with a pretty sweet environment for a friendly UNC crowd. But yeah, overall, just a fun weekend with 3 really fun games. So
I don't know if you can really call that a friendly UNC crowd. It was a pro UNC crowd with some pretty unfriendly people.
Oh yeah, there were some unfriendly people in the area, but not friendly to UNC at least.
Right. Yeah, no, great games. So, just to touch on those a little bit. First one, as I said, Friday night, St. John's and Providence. This game, Providence was dominating right out from the get-go. They got up, I think, as many as 16 or 17 in the first half, and St. John's came storming back despite Kadari Richmond, their best player, being pretty hobbled the whole game. He was in and out. But they were really good in the second half. We're all over the offensive glass. And this was despite Simeon Wilcher only went 1 of 10. They just kind of found a way. And Providence offensively was really poor in the second half. Got pushed off their spots. St. John's turned up the pressure a little bit. And, until the last shot hit by Bensley Joseph with whatever it was, 15 seconds left to tie it with that 3. They hadn't made a 3 in that half yet. So, and in the first half, I don't know exactly how many they made, but it was probably 6 or so. So it was a much different half for the Friars, which ultimately, ended in heartbreak for them at the hands of Ejiofor on a putback.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I was talking with one of my St. John's buddies, and we were talking about Kadari Richmond early on in the game. He said, "Oh, that's just how he always runs. He's just runs like he's hobbled." And I kind of agreed, but yeah, he was actually hurt for an extended period of that game, and he didn't start the second half. Sat out the first 10 minutes, and then eventually came in for the home stretch of the game. Maybe they're just trying to save his energy and hopefully get a quick burst of 10 minutes at the end, but yeah, so that was definitely an interesting dynamic there. He only ended up playing 22 minutes in this game, but it was enough for them to get the win. And yeah, the offense in the first half for St. John's just it was a bit rough. We were talking about it, the loss of Brady Dunlap actually means a decent amount here because he's really one of their only spot up shooters that they have. Simeon Wilcher wasn't able to step up. He went 1 for 10, 1 of 3 from 3. And they don't really have any other guys that profile as great shooters necessarily. It's a bunch of, ball dominant guys, a lot of athletes that, like to go get their own bucket. And they created a lot of value on the glass in the second half, which was big. And the defense stepped up, like you said. Providence offense just got super stagnant in the second half. It never really looked pretty the entire game outside of the creation of Bensley Joseph in the first half. And, obviously the big shot that he made late in that game to tie it up. But yeah, overall it looked super stagnant. And, I just don't know. Kim English isn't like the greatest offensive coach out there, in my opinion. And yeah, it was just super rough to watch. And, credit to St. John's. That tip in at the end of the game, like we saw the shot go up and like we didn't think there was going to be any time left for that tip in.
Wow.
And, looked up, there was still 2 seconds and he was able to gather and put it back in at the buzzer. So definitely a sweet environment, but it was pretty cool to see a crowd get silenced like that at the end of a game.
Yeah, for sure. And just a couple things to wrap up this game. Providence's bigs are really bad. They don't really provide anything on either end for them. They don't rebound well on the defensive end. They have terrible hands on the offensive end, don't really finish much around the rim. So that part of their offensive game missing is pretty significant. Not having Hopkins out there Friday night was kind of crucial. And then just one thing about St. John's, for as many things as Rick Pitino pulls guys out for like that, as quick as he pulls guys out for, one thing he never pulls them out for is taking bad shots. It seems like it's almost like he encourages them to take long twos early in the shot clock. And that was what was wrong with their offense in the first half, right? I mean, they did have some opportunities to get out and run in transition, but all they kept doing was pulling up from like 16 feet with 24 on the shot clock and missing those shots. Second half, they just were a bit more fortunate and they got to the line a bit more, even though their free throw shooting is horrendous. They ended up making enough in this game, but that's a thing, as we were talking about, that I think is going to come back to bite them.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that Patino's always kind of been fine with, is he doesn't really get too worked up about shot selection. It's kind of the same deal last year with Dennis Jenkins and Dingle. Like they just took a bunch of mid-range jumpers. Like they're going to take the shot that's given to them. And he's willing to live with that, especially when his team doesn't shoot it super well from three. I think he's a little more lenient on what kind of shots they take. Like take a shot that's comfortable for them. But the shots they were taking in transition, like you have one-on-one in transition, and Davon Smith and Richmond are just pulling up at the elbow. Like, go take it to the rim. Like, you're more athletic than the guy that's guarding you. At least try to get to the line. Just try to go over the top and finish at the rim. And, the shot selection, definitely a concern there.
Especially when it's a guy like Mila or something. For whatever reason, some of those Providence fans love to see him out there. But, we'll get into that a bit later on some of their fans. But,
yeah. And then just one more note for Providence. Like, they sat Esendoko. Like, he basically got benched. He had been playing like 20 minutes a game all year. We thought he was hurt going into the game, but he ends up checking back. He ends up checking in the game with about 6 or 7 minutes left in the second half. They started Anton Bonk for the first time all year, and he played the most minutes he's played all year. He didn't really provide anything on the offensive side. Their other big, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, freshman big. He doesn't provide anything on offense, really. He's a solid defender. Like all of English's guys are more drop defenders. He is good rim protector, but yeah, he's definitely a hack. But yeah, none of those bigs just really provide anything on the offensive side. So there's really no front court production, especially without Hopkins.
Yeah, for sure. The second game, as we mentioned, we continued on to New York, saw the first game at Madison Square Garden, which is really it's a cool place. They call it the most famous arena in the world, and it's definitely up there. It's a cool environment there. Their PA announcer loves to use words that you might read in like a Mark Twain novel or something about the aforementioned player who checks out of the game. Just some weird lingo there, but it checks out as one of the top ones for sure.
Yeah, and like super clean. Like obviously they've made some renovations to like the concourse area and stuff. It's more modernized now. It was a little bit smaller than I originally thought it was. Like we got in there and like there's not a bad seat in the house really. Like we thought if we were going to be sitting up a little bit higher, it was going to be like you could barely see the guys on the floor. But we actually, had a super good view despite being like a little bit higher up. And I thought it was definitely a good experience. Had the TVs in front of us, to keep tabs on a little bit of college football playoff during the timeouts. Check in on some other college hoops games, but definitely a good experience.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, the first game was UCLA and UNC, and early on, Tyler Bilodeau was putting it to these Tar Heels. Carolina, as we've discussed, just really does not have an interior presence, and UCLA was making them pay, whether that was Bilodeau going to work, Lubin not coming out to close out on Bilodeau, who I think hit 5 threes in this game, 4 or 5, and or if it was just in pick and roll when William Kyle was in the game in particular, they went into pick and roll, and Sebastian Mack basically got the Bruins whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, whether that was something for himself or, a lob to Kyle, who I think had 3 lobs in this game. So overall, UNC did end up winning this game, but I wasn't very impressed or encouraged by the performance of either team.
Yeah, no, me either. And like the difference in the game was when Bilodeau picked up his 4th with about 10 minutes left in this game. UNC went on a massive run because UCLA didn't have any other guy that they could really go to on offense outside of Sebastian Mack in the first half. He didn't do much when Bilodeau went to the bench. They got super stagnant on the offensive side. And that's my concern with them. Like Bilodeau's not going to go 5 for 6 from 3 every single night. They've been shooting like pretty well over their heads, like on this recent run they've been on. And, it eventually came back to bite them in the second half. I wasn't super inspired by UNC's effort either. Like I would say they kind of got bailed out by Bilodeau getting in foul trouble. They just keep rotating big men. Like they keep kind of just getting lost with, they don't know which guy they want to go to. They split it up. Like Lubin played 11 minutes, Ty Claude played 13, Washington 12, Withers played 6. Like it was just like Hubert was just getting upset with how one big was playing, so he just throw another big in the game. He wouldn't perform, so they just rotate another guy in. They still just haven't figured that out yet. They threw in Cade Tyson for 7 minutes, and he literally only did cardio. Yeah, he grabbed 2 rebounds, but if he's not going to shoot the ball, he brings no value to this basketball team. And realistically, I mean, he hasn't shot it well all year, so it's definitely a major concern. And like everyone's been harping about the front court, so we don't really need to, ream into him any more than we are right now. But it is a problem, and it's going to be a problem the entire season. They played super small in stretches in this game. They had the 6 minute or 3 to 4 minute stretch with Withers on the floor playing the 5. It was him and then the 4 guards. And, the one guard that impressed me the most was Ian Jackson. His ability to score at the rim is kind of ridiculous. Like he finished a lot of tough baskets going at UCLA's bigs, hit a couple tough step back jumpers as well. So definitely really impressed with him. But it wasn't super high quality basketball in my opinion. It was a really fun environment, especially with the UNC crowd there. But both these teams have their flaws, and I wouldn't consider them among the elites.
Yeah, no. UNC's guards, that's their strength, and they have a lot of figuring things out to do as well. Cadeau has struggled. He turns the ball over way too much for a guy that really, he can't shoot it. He tries to, I feel like sometimes just take it one dribble too far, and he tries to split gaps that he shouldn't be splitting. I think UNC turned it over 18 or 19 times yesterday. And with a team that's playing small a lot and that guard heavy, you can't be turning the ball over that much, especially against like a UCLA team. They have a good defense, but they're not pressuring you 94 feet, and you're supposed to have good guards. So they got to take care of the ball more. And I think that Cadeau, Trimble, they just need to play more confidently. Like we were talking about yesterday, when they catch the ball in rhythm and they're confidently shooting the ball, like teams are at least going to honor that because they're going to make more. But when Trimble catches the ball in the corner and he's like jab, jab, and then eventually settles to shoot it. It's just not in rhythm anymore. He doesn't look confident. He's hesitant. And then he ends up missing the shot. And, UNC fans are all around us are complaining about it. Like, the one that he did make in the second half, he caught it in rhythm, shot it, and, he was confident about it. So I think that needs to be more consistent for those two guys in particular. Like, neither of them are great shooters, but if you're not shooting the ball confidently, I don't care if you're a good shooter or a bad shooter, like, you're going to miss shots. So that I think needs to change. And I think as the season goes on, hopefully Hubie figures out a little bit more of like what they want to do from a rotation standpoint, because it's just very inconsistent right now. Like you were talking about with the bigs, and then with the guards, it's going to be interesting to see how, like, Jackson right now needs to be on the court. He's shooting the ball too well. He's been too efficient. And so, can you afford to play that small all the time? I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see how Hubie manages this team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is like none of them really help each other. Like they all kind of rely on their creation to get guys open, and like Cadeau and Trimble on the floor at the same time. It's just a huge lack of shooting. You can load up in the lane, and you can't really create and get into the lane and kick out for a three because you can't get there because there's two guys standing on the elbows. Like, you can help off with Trimble, who stands in the corner quite often. And yeah, like you said, it's like he just takes too much time. It's a little bit too much thought. And yeah, the one three that he just caught super quick and elevated over the top for three. Like he looks super confident on that jumper. But yeah, the problem is they just don't really help each other from a spacing perspective. And I know Jackson's shooting well. I don't think he's a 43% shooter like he's shooting it right now. Like the stroke just isn't like, I don't think it's super repeatable. I don't think it's, and RJ Davis, his game just hasn't really gotten opened up. It's a lot of continuity pick and roll game, and everyone else just kind of stands and watches and waits for something to open up. So it's something that Hubert Davis needs to figure out schematically, because they weren't really running much until like late in the second half where they were running RJ Davis off some screens. But before that, it was like your turn, my turn, and pick and roll. And I just don't really think that works super well for them in the long term.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so that's a good win for them. They needed it. That was much needed. Improved to 7-5, I think now. So they needed that one headed into the holidays. Tar Heel fans would have been pretty down, and they're already down, but pretty down at 6-6 headed into Christmas. So, they needed that one. And then the second game was number 4 in the country, Kentucky, against Ohio State. Kentucky was an 8.5-point favorite here, and they got dominated right from the get. The Ohio State guards, I thought, really forced these Kentucky guards into taking tough shots, contested long twos, contested threes late in the shot clock, and Kentucky's has been up to this point a very good offensive team, efficient. They score it well around the rim, and in this game they really, props to Ohio State's defense, but they couldn't get anything to fall. Whether it was 2 feet away or 28 feet away, they had really no answer. And there were possessions where they would get clean looks at the rim, they'd miss it, they'd get an offensive rebound, tip it back up 2, 3, 4 times, and still not get anything out of it, and then end up committing a foul, and it's going down the other way. So, I'm a little bit, and we've talked about this. Kentucky's not the 4th best team in the country. Like, they're the 3rd or 4th best team in their own conference. So, it's not where they belong. But I think that this just shows you that Kentucky is a very flawed team, especially when they're not making shots. So I think, like we've talked about, their ceiling isn't as high as others. Their floor is pretty high because most nights they're going to be solid enough to beat pretty much the teams they should beat. But their ceiling in terms of beating those top tier teams, I just don't think is there on a consistent basis.
For sure. Yeah. I had more problems with the defense for Kentucky than I did with the offense. Like, offense was they're going to always be reliant on shot making because they don't really do a fantastic job on the glass. And, they take care of the ball well, but, they're going to be relying on making jump shots. And, obviously they didn't make those. They really struggled around the rim. I think that was more of an anomaly. Like a lot of shots just rolled in and out. But you credit Ohio State's defense in this game. I think they did a really nice job playing like in the gaps while still being able to get out to shooters. Basically every three that they took was contested. So I thought they did a solid job there. And, Kentucky didn't make even the few open ones that they got. But yeah, I would like to credit Ohio State's defense for, being able to play in the gaps. They took away actions as well outside of a few plays, which it's inevitable with a Mark Pope offense. Like they're just too much off ball screening actions for you to be able to communicate well and be able to lock all of that stuff up. But they did a really nice job for the most part. The problem was with Kentucky's defense. And when you play the style that they play, like super conservative, always playing drop and pick and roll and like not really trying to get after the ball handlers. Like if you play a team like Ohio State that has, they have 3 guard shot makers on the floor at all times, especially in this game when they had like Mobley, he played pretty well. Thornton was obviously great. He had 30. And Quez Glover had a solid game in his return, made a few tough mid-range jumpers. And those are the shots that Kentucky's going to give you. But that defense, that style of defense has flaws when you're playing the elite shot makers in the country. So it gives me some pretty big concern. They had to switch to a 1-3-1 zone in this game. And I turned to you right when they went to the 1-3-1. And I was like, if your defense is playing so bad that you have to go into a 1-3-1 zone, you have major problems. Like you're not, like I said, well, exactly what I said was you're not a title contender. And that's kind of what I got out of this game. Like it might feel like a little bit of an overreaction, but I've always like had this kind of thought that the defense was never for real. And they were pretty fortunate, no teams really made any threes against them coming into this game. And Ohio State was able to kind of dice them up and get whatever they wanted, whether it was in the mid range, at the rim, or from three. They had a ton of success in this game.
Yeah, they did. Bruce Thornton was awesome in this game. He does such a good job, like using his body in and around the paint, and those little like push shots that he does from like 12 feet away. He's just so good at those. And Aaron Bradshaw was back, and he played a solid game too. He hit some shots, which if he's going to knock down, he hit a 3, another long 2. If he's going to make those shots, that's going to really help that team. So obviously Bruce Thornton's a catalyst for this team, but the whole team, like you said, Glover, Mobley, John Mobley, the freshman, he's been good. He I think he had 15 or so in this game. But he's an explosive scorer. So, this Ohio State team, I think maybe better than we've given them credit for. I think they're very matchup dependent. But, this matchup happened to be a good one for them. So, props to them for coming up ready to go, as pretty sizable underdogs and taking off the number 4 team in the country. This win's going to go a long way for them, I think, as the season wears on.
For sure. Yeah. And a lot of their problems were health related or, the whole deal going on with Bradshaw. Nobody really knows what happened, but he's back playing now. And you finally get Quez Glover back, but you got him back and you lose Michi Johnson for a little bit dealing with a personal matter. Like once they get like fully healthy, I think they could be a fairly dangerous team in the Big Ten. Not saying they're like upper tier or top tier of the Big Ten, but the offense can play with pretty much anyone. They have weapons all over the floor, all 5 positions, especially if Bradshaw's hitting shots. And Devin Royal wasn't even very good in this game. And, he's averaging like close to 17 a game right now. He's been pretty good so far this year and made a year 2 leap. And he dealt with a ton of foul trouble, but they didn't even need him because the guards were so good. Yeah,
no, he was in and out. I know, the coaching staff for Ohio State was getting pretty frustrated with him, it seemed like, because he went in there and picked up, I think, a pretty quick third one. Or second one in the first half. After he'd sat for a little bit, went right back in, picked up a cheap one, and they were frustrated because they were like, there's still 10 or 12 minutes left in the half, and that was it for his half. So that definitely didn't help. But like you said, they didn't need him. So, good win for the Buckeyes. As for some of the other games this weekend, just going to quickly go through some results. Cincinnati handled Dayton yesterday, 66-59. Or that was Friday night? Yeah, 66-59. This was a neutral site game, but it was in Cincinnati, right? So solid win for them. Dayton, a team, as I've said, I'm very high on, but that's a tough team for them to beat, especially pretty much a home game.
Yeah, tough matchup. I think Cincinnati was a little bit too athletic for them. Like they could deal with the Dayton guards. They have a ton of quickness back there and a ton of creation, but Cincinnati's able to stay home on most actions just because they're so athletic across the board. And I think that was the difference in the game. But Cincinnati in a game, they probably felt like they needed. They don't have any true marquee wins. Like they beat Xavier, but this is like their true like statement win of the year so far.
Yeah. Another game, Auburn hammered Purdue. This was a game that happened to be on one of the TVs in front of us for a few minutes anyway, at Madison Square Garden. And this game, it finished at 87-69, but that score isn't really indicative of what it was. I think it was like 63-34 at one point. This game wasn't even close. And I think it shows really that discrepancy between the top of the Big Ten and the top of the SEC right now. The SEC is just far superior. There's no true dominant force in the Big Ten right now. There are a lot of like solid teams, but nobody that, these other national powers are that afraid of.
Yeah, and Auburn was just able to hammer them on the glass. And I think the athleticism probably overwhelmed them for portions of this game. We personally didn't get to see all that much of it, but yeah, it was a demolition from the get-go. And, Janai Broome came back super quick from his shoulder injury and played really well. He had 23 and 11. So, yeah, they're going to be back, and they're clearly the best team in the country. And I have some small concerns about Purdue, especially the defense long-term. I think the offense has had some pretty bad matchups throughout the season. But once they get in the Big Ten play and, there's more conservative defenses, I think they'll be okay. But for now, playing more athletic teams has always been their kryptonite. So I think they'll be fine once they get into Big Ten play.
Yeah. A couple Big East results. Marquette beat Xavier 72-60. Xavier, as we said, or as we saw, they played UConn the other night, forced overtime on the road, and then had to turn around and play Marquette and fell by 12. And then UConn went on the road, got up big early, ended up winning 78-74 against Butler. So this game ended up being a lot closer than it seemed like it was going to be from the jump.
Yeah, UConn broke away pretty early in this game, and Butler was able to make a run. And actually, the Xavier game was actually a 2-point game. That was on me. I had that written down wrong, but yeah, it came down to the wire with Ryan Conwell with everyone thought he got tripped, but I think it looked a little bit to be like a phantom trip in that game, and Sean Miller wasn't all that happy about it. So, but yeah, I mean, credit to Marquette. They seem to be legit and may look like the favorite in the Big East right now. They've just been passing every single test with flying colors outside of, the Dayton loss on the road. But Dayton has proven they're a really good team too.
Yeah. I think that UConn in this game, kind of letting Butler get back into it, just shows the difference between this year's UConn team and last year's UConn team, aside from obviously the obvious things, right? The talent discrepancy, the players that they lost. But, this team is just, it's not a surefire, Big East title victory for them. Like I've said, I still think they're my favorite, but, they let a Butler team back into this game when they seemed to have it put away pretty early. And these UConn teams from the last couple of years just wouldn't have let that happen. So it's definitely no guarantee that they win this conference, but, I still think it's theirs to lose.
Yeah, I just think the defense is a little bit less athletic, which, it'll allow teams to get back into the game. Their point of attack defense isn't even close to what it's been the last couple of years. So they have some other things to figure out schematically. I think the defense has a high floor, but yeah, it's going to be tough against good offenses for them to be able to generate, great defensive efficiency.
Yeah. Our favorite team, the Memphis Tigers, they got blown out at home against Mississippi State. This game finished at 79-66, but it really wasn't that close. For most of the second half, it was around 20. And then Memphis kind of cut it down a little bit later in the second half. But, Mississippi State, they should get into the AP poll tomorrow, I would think. They've had some very quality wins. They were just outside of it last week. And this is for what you may think about Memphis. They've been solid so far to start this season. So this is a quality win for Mississippi State.
Yeah, quality win for Mississippi State, but Memphis is a fraud. That's all I have next.
Yeah, no, they are.
They're not going to win the American either. Like, I know they're odds-on favorite to win the American. They will find a way to lose this conference. I don't care who comes up. Like, I don't care if any other team in this conference is not good. Memphis will find a way to not win this conference.
Yeah, no, it checks out. I mean, in Penny Hardaway's tenure, that's what happens. So we'll see who it is that knocks them off this year.
Give me the Owls. FAU.
All right. We had Princeton. They played Rutgers, picked up a big win, 83-82 over them. Rutgers hit a 3 to go up by 1 late in the last 10 seconds, and then in the last 20 seconds, and then Princeton came back with 7 seconds left, hit a game winner to win 83-82.
Yeah, looked like a really fun finish. Ace Bailey hitting that 3, and then Caden Pierce coming down and hitting the game winner with just a few seconds on the clock. Rutgers definitely has their share of problems. Like, if Steve Peichel defenses don't give up 83 and like against a slower paced team, like regardless of how efficient they are, like this is a different Steve Peichel team. The offense has a ton of upside, but they have times where they're going to shoot themselves out of games. And yeah, they definitely have problems, and they're definitely not a tournament team right now, and I don't anticipate them doing enough work to get in.
Yeah, I don't see them getting in. It's gonna be tough. It's an uphill battle at this point with non-conference pretty much out of the way. And this is a game they can't drop to a Princeton team who's like they've had their share of problems. They've lost some games that they probably shouldn't have. So not a great loss for Rutgers, even though Princeton has kind of had that pedigree over the last few years to knock off some teams. But Rutgers just not a great team right now. Creighton bounced back after losing in a big way to Georgetown last week. They knocked off Villanova by 7 at home. This was a much needed win for the Blue Jays after that loss at Georgetown to open up their Big East play.
Yeah, and Creighton, they shot the lights out in this game, and like in a game that they really needed. It was a super high efficiency game. Both sides shooting over 50%. Creighton shot 56% from 3, 14 of 25. Jemiah Neal, 6 of 7, a guy who's 25% from 3 in his career. Kind of lit it up in this game. Ashworth 20 and 11 in this game and shot 3 for 5 from 3 himself. It was a game that they really needed. And Eric Dixon obviously was able to step up and provide some offense. He had 27. They were pretty efficient across the board as well. It's a Villanova team that's on like the rise. As much as we kind of like to talk about how bad they've been, like I think the offense is like up there with some of the top teams in the Big East. But yeah, it was a pretty tough spot for them to go into Omaha and get the win against a desperate Creighton team that really needed it.
Yeah, this Creighton team, I think all season long we're going to be talking about them as one of the more up and down teams in the country. They're going to struggle on the road. I think they'll win some big games at home, as we've seen. They needed this one. They beat Kansas at home. There are going to be other games like that they're going to win at home, but then they're going to struggle on the road, and you're going to be like, what is wrong with Creighton? So ultimately, I think that's going to be their demise. They're not a very deep team. They're not a super talented team, especially with Pop Isaacs out. They're just very reliant on Ashworth and Neal now making shots and Kalkbrenner having to be elite every night, which he is, but he's going to be consistently elite every single night. No questions asked if they're going to be a top team and have a chance to make the tournament, which I'm not sure they're going to be able to do.
Yeah, no, I don't think they're getting in. I think they're going to drop too many games against the bottom of the Big East, which is basically every loss at the bottom's a bad loss at this point.
Yeah. Today we had a pretty fun game. Illinois and Missouri. This game ended up being kind of a free throw contest in the second half. Illinois pulled it out 80-77. The free throw that Boswell missed actually at the end was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Illinois' first missed free throw of the game. And I think they went 22 of 23 in the game. And Missouri actually got a pretty solid look. Some of the Illinois players seemed to be kind of like moving out of the way, like they thought they were maybe up more than three. They were, Underwood was saying not to foul, it looked like, but they still needed to guard him because that very well, they got a very clean look, could have been going to overtime.
Yeah, like it kind of looked like Boswell was like about to foul and then pulled away because he saw that Cruz might have pulled up for three in that spot, and like, you don't want to do that. Obviously, he's going to get 3 shots there. But yeah, overall, like a pretty fun game. Illinois let them back in a little bit when they got up double digits in the second half. They turned it over quite a bit. Yakachonis had a stretch where he turned it over a bunch. But despite that, he was pretty incredible in this game again. Like we've talked about, it's just something that Illinois and Underwood's going to have to live with is the volatility of Yakachonis a little bit. But
he hit two big shots.
He's been fantastic. Yeah, he hits big time shots. Obviously he's a little bit loose with the ball, but I think the good outweighs the bad. And, from watching this game, I think they're just a little bit too reliant on Boswell to be the second guy. Like, he's not really a major offensive piece, really. And they used him a ton in pick and roll. And although they did win the game, I just wasn't super inspired by the other guys on offense outside of Yakachonis against a Missouri team that I just don't really think is all that good either. Like, Dennis Gates, he rotates way too many guys into the game. Like, at some point, you got to tighten the rotation. Like, he plays like 12 guys every single night. Like, that's just asking for you to run into a bad stretch of basketball. Like, you're not going to be able to rotate 15 different lineup combinations into the game and like be good with all 15. Like, you're going to have a lineup that has a super bad stretch and like takes you out of the game. Like, in college hoops, you don't need a super deep rotation just because you're playing 32 regular season games a season. Like, you're not playing back-to-backs. Like, play your guys, like play your 7 or 8 guys and roll with it. Like, you can't roll out 12, 13 guys a night. It just doesn't work, regardless of how talented and how deep you are.
No, and it's impossible to manage too. Like, that, if that's in the back of his mind all the time that he has to manage that, like that's impossible. Like even 9, 10 guys can sometimes be tough to manage. I think like if you're sitting around that 8 or 9, like that's a good spot to be.
Yeah. And I'm not a fan of like I'm not going to call it a gimmicky defense, but the amount of switching of defenses that he does just kind of shows like we talked about with the Kentucky game, the fact that they had to keep switching from man to zone just shows that you're not really that good of a defensive team. Missouri kept switching to zone to man. Like, obviously you're trying to switch defenses to confuse some teams, but if you're good enough defensively, you don't have to switch your defenses. And he just continues to do that, whether something's working or not. And I think he just tries to tinker with a little too much throughout the game, regardless of how his team's playing. And it's a little bit annoying to watch. And it's a reason why they just, haven't gained a ton of traction yet. And I know they're 10-2, but they don't really have any great wins outside of the Kansas game. That's a rivalry game, a game that they're going to get their 100% effort for. Like, I'm just not super bought into this team in general.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, a few games from earlier in the week, wanted to briefly touch on. Oklahoma had a heroic shot by Jeremiah Fears, who put up 30 in the second night of the Jumpman Invitational. That was on Wednesday. 4-point play with under 10 seconds left. And kind of a marginal foul. Didn't really, if you saw the replay, didn't really look like much contact was made. But, the ref called it. He had kind of a bad angle on it. So from his vantage point, it seemed like I could understand why he called it. But definitely a good sell job by Fears. He's been watching some James Harden or Dame Lillard or something to be able to draw that call. But, then he made the free throw calmly, 187-86 after, putting up a stop there in the last 7 seconds or so. So good win for Oklahoma in a game that we definitely expected them to lose.
Yeah, that shot hurt my wallet a little bit too. Wasn't wasn't ideal. They were up 3 there before the N-1-3. Then Michigan couldn't get it done in the last possession. But yeah, both teams definitely they still have their flaws, and Oklahoma was pretty fortunate 3-point defense wise. Like Michigan didn't really shoot it well at all. I mean, although they are a pretty good perimeter defense in general. Um, Overall, yeah, it was a super fun game, obviously, and yeah, Michigan's defense also has its share of troubles. They struggle to contain Fears, and as good as he is, like everything was running through him, and they couldn't really take him away. So, yeah, credit to him. Like he's a fantastic player, especially for his age, and he should be able to take them places, and hopefully it takes them into the tournament.
Yeah. Another game. This was on Tuesday, the first night of the Jumpman Invitational. This was a game I was at, Florida and UNC. This was another good game. Florida jumped out to a massive lead in the first half. UNC came out in the second half with some pretty serious defensive intensity, turned Florida over a bunch, which is, another concern I have with them, just taking care of the basketball. But UNC got out in transition and, behind a very pro UNC crowd, probably 90% UNC fans there in Charlotte, despite it being on a neutral site. They came back. They took the lead, got up by 4 even with like 4:02 remaining. Todd Golden called the timeout, and his team came back and really weathered the storm in the final 4 minutes. And, they killed Carolina on the offensive boards. They picked up some key offensive boards late and ultimately ended up winning 90-84. UNC went very cold down the stretch. RJ Davis had a nice clean look on a flare screen, I think, with about 40 seconds left, pretty wide open in front of the Carolina bench, and he missed it. That would have been to tie it. So that shot obviously ended up being very crucial. And, we've talked about UNC enough, but, their margin for error is just very slim right now, especially against the top teams. So, Davis missing that shot proved to be very crucial because it's hard to win a game when you give up 90 points.
Yeah. And, Florida was just physically dominant for the most part in this game too. I mean, one thing I did notice, obviously the ball security was a pretty big issue for Florida, especially early second half. And that's always kind of been our underlying issue with this team throughout the entire year. And their point of attack defense, especially in the front court, in the second half wasn't really great. The guards for Carolina were able to get switches on like Alex Condon and Tommy Haug a little bit. And they were able to take advantage of got into the lane, especially Ian Jackson. He had a stretch where he was just able to drive by those bigs and score at the rim. He had a ton of success. So there's still like some issues with Florida, despite them, being undefeated still at this point in the year and dominating most of their competition. But yeah, there's just definitely a few underlying issues. And yeah, we talked about Carolina enough here we've talked about their problems, but I definitely like their resilience in this game.
Yeah, same. And the final game, this was a rivalry game, South Carolina and Clemson, ended up going to overtime. For those of you that maybe were on the Chase Hunter prop that Cody had put out, he had zero or 2 at halftime.
I think it was 2.
2, and he needed to get 15, and in the second half in overtime ended up finishing with 27, I believe. So, nice run for him in the second half. Great win, though, for South Carolina, 91-88. That game, I feel like it's just kind of a 50-50 rivalry game, despite, what you may think about either team.
Yeah, and that's what most of these rivalry games are, especially when it's played on South Carolina's home floor. Like, they're definitely expected to win that game, and the environment was pretty crazy. Clemson, they got into a bunch of foul trouble, especially in the second half. Locken and Shefflin both fouled out in this game. That was ultimately the reason why they won. Chase Hunter hit a miraculous shot to send it to overtime, like a 30-foot bank shot. They ended up, he had like 20 points in the second half and, carried it into overtime and had some success. But ultimately, they just ran out of bodies in this game, and South Carolina was able to get it done, especially on the glass late.
Yeah. Clemson bounced back yesterday with a win over Wake Forest. Wake Forest team that's reeling. So That's enough about the results of the games for this week. Just going to give some quick shout outs to some teams, or some takeaways about some teams. The first one being Vermont, who has just always been the America East powerhouse, and here they are losing to a bad Dartmouth team by 30.
Yeah, it's not pretty, and obviously Vermont's dealing with injuries, but they are extremely vulnerable in the America East, and they might not even be the favorite to win this conference anymore. Like, you have teams on the rise now. Like our Maine Black Bears are on the rise. They actually have a real chance to win this thing now, with UMass Lowell and Bryant not necessarily being like far and away the best teams in this conference. But I think it's a 4-horse race in this conference. So it'll be exciting to watch. Vermont's offense is just in real trouble. Like they're trying to run some offense through Shamir Bogues, and that's just not who he is. Definitely some major concerns. The shooting hasn't really been there, and when Nick Fiorillo, obviously he's a main guy, like he's just not providing the production defensively. He's been kind of getting carved up a bit in pick and roll, and they don't really have an answer, and they don't really have another guy on the bench who can replace him and provide value on the defensive side. So some major issues on both ends.
Yeah, the America East should be a fun conference this year, though. Now with Vermont not necessarily as that powerhouse, so should be cool to see, especially with the Black Bears firmly in the mix.
Let's get them a home playoff game. That'd be pretty fun to watch.
That'd be cool. Drake stayed undefeated, so that leads us to this question: which team's going to stay undefeated the longest? Drake, Tennessee, Florida, and Oklahoma, and which of them will go down first?
Yeah, first off, just credit to Drake for this run they've gone on. Like they haven't played slouches. Like they have wins over. Miami's a slouch. We'll start with that. But over Kansas State in overtime was a big time win. Took down FAU as well, who's I think is a great team in the American, and then closed it out with who'd they beat in the championship? Was it Vanderbilt? They beat Vanderbilt in the title of the Charleston Classic. So they've beaten some solid teams, and they've looked really, really good. Ben McCollum's got his guys rolling there, but I'm going to say Oklahoma goes down first. I believe they play at Alabama on January 4th. So I think that's really the first spot that any of these teams that are really on upset alert. And I would like to say Drake stays undefeated the longest, but I'm not super high on them being able to break away from inferior competition. Like we saw it this weekend, like a Green Bay team that everybody hates, and they've been reeling. They hung around and almost beat them. Ended up only winning that game by 10. So I'm going to say Tennessee stays undefeated the longest. They have a few more bye games after the break. So I think they can hold the number one spot in the AP poll unless Auburn overtakes them with that dominant win. So yeah, I'll take Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat. If it weren't for Florida playing at Kentucky on January 4th. So I think Florida and Oklahoma are both going to go down on the same day. January 4th, right? That was the day you said Oklahoma plays Alabama.
Yeah.
So I think they both go down that day. I was going to say Tennessee or Florida's going to stay undefeated the longest with a win over Tennessee on January 7th at home. But, I just think that, Tennessee's not going to lose to Arkansas in their first game of SEC play at home. And Florida, that's a tough place to go play at Rupp against a Kentucky team that's going to be that's their SEC opener, so they're going to be ready to go.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I could easily see a world where Drake is the first team, the team that stays undefeated the longest, just with them going into conference play, and it's not like a super great conference. But yeah, like I said, they're I think they can be a little bit vulnerable with their style.
Yeah, I agree. Now, a few teams to also shout out, the Georgia Bulldogs, who we've talked about as a team that we kind of had at the bottom of the SEC, and they've been receiving votes here for a while now in the AP poll, and they picked up a 50-point win over Buffalo, who's not very good, but a team in Georgia that's now sitting at 11-1. They've been surprisingly very good. Led by Asa
Yeah.
Newell, who's been, one of the top freshmen in the country.
Yeah, and like they've never really been able to break away from the spy game competition in the past, just because they haven't been very good under Mike White until this year. And now they have like a really really good front court, and the guards are pretty athletic, so they definitely have a higher floor and ceiling this year, and could possibly make a little bit of noise in the SEC.
Yeah, for sure. Now another team I want to touch on. This has been a team I've talked about a little bit recently. And that's Georgetown. They actually just won again. Moved to now 2-0 in the conference, 10-2 overall, with a win over Seton Hall tonight and a narrow victory by 1 point on the road. So good for Georgetown and Ed Cooley, who seem to be trending in the right direction, as I've been kind of applauding them for. Thomas Sorber appears to be the real deal as a freshman. He had 19 again tonight on very efficient shooting. So, happy for Georgetown that it appears that they're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, it's just a better put together roster now at this point. There's more guard talent. The defense has really improved, and Sorber's been the entire difference on both sides of the ball. Being able to get on the offensive glass and then providing the rim protection that they need. So, it's a little bit more of an Ed Cooley identity as opposed to last year, where they just didn't really have anything figured out. And it's not really, can't really blame Cooley for that. Year one in a new school. But yeah, credit to them, and they could be on the rise in this conference, possibly, middle of the pack at least, maybe some upside to finish in the top 4.
Yeah, who knows that with that conference. So I'll be interested to see how they do when they start playing, UConn, St. John's, Marquette, where they stand. That'll be a good measuring stick. So the final thing I wanted to talk about, well, actually 2 things I want to briefly mention. One, Miami basketball is terrible. They lost to Mount St. Mary's at home yesterday in overtime. Granted, they're without Nigel Pack, but it doesn't matter who they're playing. You're an ACC school and you're playing a team from the MAAC. You should not be losing at home as sizable favorites. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was Florida basketball yesterday, out rebounding. Who'd they play again?
North Florida,
right? 63-21 on the glass. That 25 offensive rebounds. That is just pitiful from North Florida.
How many shots did they miss in this game?
That's a great question. But, about North Florida, they've beaten some solid teams, right?
Oh yeah. They have a couple upset wins over South Carolina opening night, and they beat Georgia Tech as well. Like, they're beating power teams, and crazy that they got crushed on the glass that badly.
Right. Florida was 34 for 76, had 26 offensive rebounds. The final rebound count was 65-25. So out-rebounded them by 40. North Florida was 13 of 56 from the field. So pretty abysmal numbers there. But, I think that just shows Florida can be very dominant on the glass with the size that they have between Chinyelu, Tommy Houck, Condon, and then, Will Richard, some of those other guys, like guards, physical guards that come and rebound down. They can be all over the glass.
Yeah, I mean, that was a 63% offensive rebound percentage. Like, they're grabbing 63% of their misses. Like, you can't even finish a possession with, if you're not gonna, get on the glass at all. And Florida's a pretty small team, but Florida's just super dominant, and that's how they create their value on the offensive side. So, yeah they're going to be a tough team to beat.
Yeah, for sure. So, other than that, pretty slow week this week with the holidays coming, right? We got Christmas on Wednesday. There's no games. I don't think there's no games Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. There's the Diamond Head Classic in Hawaii that that started today. There'll be games tomorrow and then again on Wednesday. But not really anything else going on until Saturday. There's some solid games, like UCLA plays Gonzaga next weekend, but we'll get into that stuff later in the week. But nothing really going on this week. We'll probably do a best bets episode at the end of the week to discuss the weekend games. We're going to put out some updated futures for kind of a mid-season check-in, where some value might be. Probably put an article out about that at some point this week. We're going to start doing a couple of new things as well in regards to the content that we're putting out. We're going to try to do a top 25 in our perspective every week. So, different from the AP poll, what we see as the top 25 teams in the country. And then we're also going to start doing arena reviews. So we're going to review Amica Mutual Pavilion first, which is where Providence plays. So we're going to review that based on some certain categories, and we'll do a post about that, and we'll try to do that for all the different arenas that we go to, and give them each their own individual score. So for those of you ever looking to go to a game, you'll be able to see kind of where these arenas stack up.
Yeah, that'll definitely be a fun thing to do, and if other people have been there, feel free to, have your differences and reviews as well. But yeah, as for the AP top 25, like updates that we're going to be doing every week, like if our AP or if our poll is close to the AP top 25, slander us all you want, because the AP does a very bad job of representing who the top 25 teams are. So we're going to hopefully try to have a little bit of a different spin on things.
Yeah. And one more thing before we wrap things up, without giving away too much about what I think about Amica Mutual Pavilion, it costs $20 for a slice of pizza and a bottle of water. That's all that needs to be said about that side of things. Pretty impressive stuff out of their pricing group there. So other than that, hope you guys enjoy what little college basketball there is this week. Hope everyone has a Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you at the end of the week in our next episode and then our Best Bets episode.